There are people who walk into your life and instantly demand attention. They're loud about it, bold with it, obvious in the way they show up. And then there are the ones who don't need to demand anything because your mind does all the work for them. You don't even realize it's happening at first. You just start imagining things, conversations you haven't had yet, places you haven't gone, moments that haven't happened but feel like they already have. That's not a coincidence. That's seduction. And the first trigger we're going to talk about is one of the most powerful, most overlooked and most misunderstood, the future self-invitation. Not a fantasy, not a compliment, but a mirror held up to someone's potential, so believable, so grounded, so vividly described that they begin to associate your presence with their personal evolution. They don't chase you because of how you make them feel now. They chase you because of who they think they could become with you in the picture. This is where most people get it wrong. They try to impress, they try to be desirable, they try to make someone want them. But real seduction doesn't come from showing off who you are. It comes from showing someone who they are when they're around you. And even more than that, who they're not yet, but could be. That one tiny difference changes everything. Because now your presence isn't just pleasurable, it's transformational. Your attention becomes aspirational. You're not just attractive, you're a symbol of expansion. But here's the catch. This only works if it feels real, not idealized, not overpromised, real. So instead of saying something like, "We'd be so good together," or "I can imagine us going on amazing trips," you drop a subtle textured story that includes them, quietly, casually, with just enough detail to make it believable. You're talking, and you say something like, "You strike me as the type who'd end up thriving in a little cottage somewhere quiet. You'd complain about the silence at first, but 3 weeks in, I'd catch you journaling on the porch every morning, coffee in hand, absolutely glowing." That's it. One line, one soft projection. But it plants a seed. Their brain doesn't just hear a compliment. It runs the simulation, the smell of the coffee, the feel of the wood underfoot, the silence they'd grow into, the way they'd feel in that life. And most importantly, you were the one who saw it first. You weren't trying to flatter them. You weren't love-bombing or manipulating. You simply described a future where they felt more like themselves, and you were part of the environment that allowed that version of them to exist. That's seductive, because now you're not chasing their attention. You're giving them a taste of who they've always wanted to be, and letting them chase that. And when the image is specific enough, vivid enough, human enough to feel like it could actually happen, they'll come back to you, mentally, over and over again. Not because you're exciting, but because they were exciting when they were with you. And that's the whole game. Most people seduce by focusing outward. They try to be interesting, entertaining, magnetic, but the real game is inward. When you can subtly shift someone's self-perception in your presence, when you become a reference point for how much more alive, expressive, creative, or free they could feel, you create emotional gravity. They don't just want you, they want the version of themselves that only exists around you. And that's what makes it impossible to walk away. Because now walking away from you would feel like walking away from progress. This doesn't require some long speech or calculated pitch. It can be one passing comment, one tiny imaginative moment, one emotional breadcrumb that leads their mind to a future you didn't explicitly ask for, but now lives in their head with your voice attached. The next time they think about evolving, becoming better, or doing something new, they won't be able to separate that image from you. And that's the art. You never position yourself as the prize. You position their growth as the prize, and yourself as the key that unlocks it. If you can do this without attachment, without desperation, and without making it about you, they will feel the shift, and they will begin to chase the feeling, not because you asked, but because you activated something they hadn't realized they were starving for. Seduction doesn't start when someone wants you. It starts when someone wants themselves more, when you're around. The chase doesn't begin with desire. It begins with a question. And the more interesting that question is, the longer it lingers, the more it resists resolution, the deeper the hook gets lodged in the mind. People don't obsess over things they understand. They obsess over things they almost understand. That's where the second seduction trigger lives. It's not about withholding affection or being mysteriously distant. It's about how you reveal your life fragment by fragment, until someone isn't sure if they want you or if they just want to finish the story. The trick is to never tell the full story. You give them just enough detail to taste it, enough to see that there's more under the surface, but never enough to satisfy. That's what creates curiosity. That's what makes people chase, not because they're being manipulated, but because you've become a living mystery they're dying to solve. Think about it. The people who stick in your mind are rarely the ones who told you everything. They're the ones who left you wondering. They're the ones who mentioned something in passing, a trip, a scar, a moment, and then let it sit there like a loose thread. And even if you didn't mean to, you kept pulling at it. Curiosity fragments are not secrets. They're narrative invitations. You don't dangle bait. You drop one vivid detail in a conversation, let it land, and move on as if it wasn't important. You're talking casually, and then you say something like, "I haven't felt that since that night in Naples, but that's a whole other thing." And then you take a sip of your drink. You don't pause for a reaction. You don't offer to explain. You keep talking. That one sentence, if timed right, will replay in their mind for days, not because you said it dramatically, but because it didn't match the tone of the moment, because it came from somewhere deeper, somewhere they now feel invited to explore, but not yet. This is where most people ruin it. They overshare to compensate for insecurity. They rush to be understood. But seduction isn't about being understood. It's about being explored. When you tell someone everything too soon, you remove the joy of discovery. You remove the need to chase. But when you build your presence like a novel with layers, themes, tension, and open loops, you activate something ancient in the human brain, the need for narrative closure. And yet you never give it. Not completely, not all at once. You let them work for it, ask for it, stay curious, because once they know the full story, the spell breaks, the chase dies when the mystery ends. What makes this trigger powerful is not just the content of what you say, but how and when you say it. It must feel unintentional, like you let something slip, like you didn't realize the weight of what you just said. The moment it feels rehearsed, it becomes manipulation. But if you're calm, grounded, and present, a single offhand comment can become a whole narrative in someone else's mind. I used to be a different person back then. I don't talk about it much. That's all. No explanation. No drama. You're not being secretive. You're being real. And your restraint makes the fragment more powerful than the whole. And when they ask, because they will ask eventually, don't unload everything. Give them a different part, a different angle. If they ask about Naples, you mention a memory from a different city. If they ask what changed you, you mention a book instead of a moment. You give them pieces, not to frustrate them but to let them earn access. This pacing builds anticipation. It creates the experience that every time they get a little closer, a new door opens, and that makes you unforgettable. Here's what most people don't realize. We're trained to chase what feels just out of reach, not what's already been handed to us. When you master curiosity fragments, you don't just become interesting, you become unfinished. And unfinished people are the ones who live in our heads rent-free, not because they demanded attention, but because they quietly earned obsession. This kind of seduction is about story structure. You don't need to have lived a dramatic life. You don't need wild tales or trauma. What you need is awareness. You need to understand that the delivery of a moment can make it unforgettable. If you had a strange dream once, tell part of it. If you had an intense realization during a solo trip, mention just the setting. Don't make yourself the hero. Make yourself the enigma. Not by being vague, but by being selectively specific. People don't remember the loudest person in the room. They remember the one who made them feel something, and then walked away before explaining it. When done right, curiosity fragments don't just draw people in. They make you linger in their mind long after the conversation ends. You become a living question. And questions, once planted, don't just disappear. They haunt. They echo. They grow. And that is the second seduction trigger. There's a certain kind of attention that doesn't feel like flattery. It feels like access. Not the kind you give freely, not the kind that's available to everyone, but the kind that makes someone pause and wonder, why me? Why now? And that's exactly the question you want them asking. Because once they feel chosen specifically, unusually, precisely, they'll start to crave the feeling again. That's the seduction of privileged attention. It's not about being charming. It's not about being generous. It's about the way you allocate your presence. When your attention feels like a private currency, rare, intentional, unspoken, it becomes the thing they chase without realizing why. You don't make a big show out of it. You just look at them a little differently than you look at everyone else. You speak in a tone reserved only for them, and you do it all so subtly that they start to feel special without you ever having to say it out loud. This isn't about scarcity. It's not about being emotionally distant or hard to reach. That's withholding, and it works for a while, but it's not sustainable. Privileged attention works differently. It's not cold. It's targeted. It's not about how often you show up. It's about how you show up for them specifically. It's in the way you remember things other people forget, a comment they made in passing, a story they told half a year ago, a look they gave in a moment when they didn't realize anyone was watching. And when you reference it, not dramatically but naturally, it lands hard, not because you're trying to impress them, but because no one else noticed, and suddenly they feel seen in a way they didn't expect. That's what creates the emotional hook. The seduction is in the contrast. If you're warm and open with everyone, your attention is sweet but meaningless. But if you're calm, composed and selective, and then suddenly they're the one you call at a strange hour with something that reminded you of them, or the one you send a one-line message to out of nowhere that says, "You'd appreciate this," with no explanation, that moment becomes sharp. Not because of what you said, but because you never do that for anyone else, or at least they don't think you do. That ambiguity, that feeling that they might be seeing a side of you most people don't, that's the trigger. People chase not because they're bored, they chase because they sense layers they haven't unlocked yet, and privileged attention is one of those layers. When you offer it in small, irregular doses, anchored in intimacy instead of volume, they start to associate your attention with significance. Your gaze means something, your tone means something, your silence even means something, and when every moment with you carries weight, they stop taking you casually. You're no longer one of many. You're the one whose approval feels like currency, whose attention is a reward, not because you made it feel that way on purpose, but because it genuinely is rare. You can create this effect with simple rituals, not grand gestures. A private nickname you never explain, a particular question you always ask them and no one else, a way you say goodbye that doesn't sound like anything you say to others. These aren't tricks, they're markers. They signal to the other person that something about them draws something out of you. And the more personal your rituals, the deeper the bond becomes. They'll start looking for your cues, waiting for the next signal that they still have access to you. And when you skip a day, when you go silent for a bit, they'll notice, not because you vanished, but because the world feels less sharp without your attention directed at them. This kind of attention doesn't need a reason. That's what makes it powerful. You don't text them because it's a holiday. You don't check in because something happened. You reach out because something small reminded you of them, a scent, a phrase, a moment, and instead of explaining that, you just dropped the thread, saw a blue notebook and thought of you. That's it. No explanation, no punchline. You let their mind fill in the rest, and what fills in is usually far more powerful than anything you could have scripted. That's how seduction works, not through delivery, but through implication. What makes privileged attention so hard to walk away from is how it shifts the power dynamic. They're not chasing your time, they're chasing your focus, and focus, when it's genuine and rare, is addictive, especially in a world where everyone is distracted. When you show someone that you're capable of noticing them on purpose, you become the exception to every shallow interaction they've had. They remember you because they remember how they felt when you looked at them, and if that look felt private, familiar, earned, they will come back for it, again and again. Because more than beauty, more than charm, what people really crave is to be chosen. Seduction doesn't live in words, it lives in memory, and the strongest memories aren't intellectual, they're sensory. A single smell, a sound, a specific rhythm of voice, these are the things that linger long after you've left the room, not because they were loud, but because they were personalized, repeated, consistent. When you become a signature in someone's sensory world, one they can't find anywhere else, you make yourself unforgettable without trying harder. You don't need to be around all the time. You just need to leave behind something that stays, something that shows up when they least expect it and makes them think of you instantly. That's the power of the sensory signature. You train their nervous system to associate a feeling, a softness, an excitement, a calm with your presence. And once that pattern is established, they'll start chasing it the moment it's gone. Most people overlook this. They focus on personality, conversation, attraction, all cerebral things. But the body remembers what the mind forgets. You might not recall what someone said to you 5 nights ago, but you'll remember how their cologne lingered in your hoodie for days. You'll remember how their laugh hit a certain pitch just before they made you feel understood. You'll remember the 3-note melody that always seemed to play when you were with them. Those patterns aren't just background noise. They're emotional anchors. And once someone starts associating those specific signals with connection, warmth, intimacy, they'll start craving the cue without even knowing why. Creating a sensory signature isn't about being flashy. It's not about wearing something strong or doing something dramatic. It's about consistency, subtlety, precision. Maybe you wear the same scent every time you see them, not something overwhelming, just something quiet and earthy like cedar or amber. And then weeks later, when they smell it on someone else in passing, their body tenses, their chest tightens, their brain stutters, because their subconscious already assigned that smell to you. And now you're showing up in places you've never been. That's seduction, not through presence, but through impression. Or maybe it's a phrase, not just what you say, but how you say it, a tone, a pause, a rhythm. Maybe every time you part ways you say, "Don't get boring," and you say it with a smirk, every time. Not once, not twice, every time. It becomes your thing, and at first they laugh, but later they start expecting it, and when it doesn't come, it feels like something's missing. You've created an emotional reflex, and that reflex belongs to you. Or it's a song, not their favorite song, not something trendy, just one track you always seem to play when you're both in the same space. And over time it stops being just a song. It becomes a timestamp, a feeling, a whole internal movie reel connected to your energy. When it plays again and you're not around, they don't just think about the lyrics, they feel your absence in their chest, because that song now means something, and that meaning is yours. This trigger works because it bypasses conscious logic. They don't sit there analyzing why they miss you. They just hear something, smell something, feel something, and suddenly they're back in a memory with you. But this time it's happening without your effort. You're not texting, you're not flirting, you're just echoing through their body like a ripple. The more specific your cues, the stronger the echo. The trick is not to overdo it. If you overload the experience, they'll become numb. But if you pick one sensory lane, just one, and thread it through each interaction with quiet consistency, you become a part of their internal world. People chase not only what they enjoy, but what their body has been trained to expect. When your energy is tied to a physical experience, a temperature, a sound, a word, a smell, you become less of a person and more of a place. And people don't forget places where they felt most alive. They revisit, they return, they re-enter those spaces in their minds, even when they're trying not to. The sensory signature doesn't speak, it doesn't ask, it doesn't demand attention. It just exists, embedded in the details of every moment you share. And when those moments are gone, the signature stays. It lingers in clothing, in playlists, in quiet hours when their mind wanders and their senses pick up a familiar thread. You're not messaging them, but their body is. And the message is this: you're not done with this person yet. This is how you become a part of their emotional reflexes, not by being dramatic, not by trying harder, but by selecting one small sensory symbol and repeating it like a whisper until it becomes a memory. Because in the end, what people chase isn't always love or lust or even validation. Sometimes they're chasing a moment in time, a version of themselves they felt around you, a familiar warmth they can't find anywhere else. And that moment begins with a smell, a sound, a sentence, a fingerprint you leave on their nervous system, one only you know how to touch. Some people are warm all the time, kind, smiling, approachable. And because of that, their warmth stops meaning anything. It's background noise, nice but forgettable. You never feel like you earned it. It's just there, constant, unchanging, always available. But seduction doesn't live in constant availability. It lives in contrast, in change, in polarity. Which brings us to the next trigger, polarized warmth. This isn't about being cold or distant. It's not about playing games. It's about knowing the exact value of your emotional intensity and using it like a spotlight. Not everyone gets to feel it, and even when they do, it doesn't last long. It comes in sharp, deliberate moments that pierce through the noise and stay with them long after you've returned to stillness. Because when your warmth is real, rare and selective, it becomes unforgettable. There's a specific kind of seduction that happens when someone doesn't know when the next moment of closeness will arrive. They can't predict it, they can't schedule it. All they know is that when it does happen, it changes them. It makes them feel seen in a way they didn't expect. That's what polarized warmth does. It creates an emotional imprint, but only because it wasn't there the whole time. You have to establish your baseline first, your calm, your groundedness, your ability to be completely still. And then when the moment feels right, you shift, you look directly at them. You make one precise comment that acknowledges something meaningful, not shallow, not decorative, but something they didn't know anyone else noticed. You always keep things light in groups, but I can tell you carry a lot more than you let on. Then you go quiet, let it land, and after that, You go back to neutral, back to calm. This movement from steady to intimate and then back to steady is the entire seduction, because now your warmth feels earned, not handed out, not broadcasted, earned. And people will chase that feeling, not because it's manipulative, but because it felt true, and they want to feel it again. The power of this trigger is that it doesn't require constant effort. You're not performing. You're not turning yourself into a show. You're simply being deliberate. You're choosing your moments. You're letting someone experience the contrast between your quiet presence and your focused attention. And that contrast is what makes them start to crave you, because they don't know when it will come next. They don't know what they'll do to deserve it, but they remember how it felt when they had it. Polarized warmth also makes people feel emotionally safe, but in a way that's deeply attractive, not maternal or bland. Because when you're not always spilling affection, when you're not constantly filling space, your rare emotional offerings carry more weight. When you do decide to say something kind or intimate, it doesn't sound rehearsed. It sounds earned. It feels like something you couldn't hold back, not something you just say to everyone. And when that happens, people start to feel chosen, not because you told them, but because they can sense it in the shift. Think of it like weather. If the sun was always shining, no one would notice. But when it breaks through after days of grey, it feels sacred, memorable, needed. That's your warmth. When you offer it with intentional breaks, you teach people to notice it, to value it, to anticipate it. And anticipation is one of the most powerful forms of seduction. This kind of polarity also helps you avoid becoming emotionally flat. A lot of people think being seductive means being mysterious or unavailable all the time. But that only works for so long. Eventually people get tired of guessing. What they don't get tired of is earned closeness. They don't get tired of someone who's grounded, self-possessed, not easily swayed, and then without warning becomes intensely human for just a second. That second is what they'll replay over and over in their mind. That's what they'll chase. You can express polarized warmth in very small ways. You're sitting with someone, talking casually, and they mention something that clearly took effort, getting out of bed on a hard day, finishing a project they hated, supporting someone they secretly resent. Most people would nod, say that's great, and move on. But you look at them, soften your voice and say, you did that even when no one saw it. That's strength. Most people don't have that. And then, nothing. No need for more. You go back to sipping your drink, scrolling your phone, whatever you were doing. That one moment now lives in their chest, not because you stayed in it, but because you let it go. The key is calibration. Don't fake emotional highs. Don't force deep moments just to appear connected. Let your baseline be calm, present, neutral, and then, in the right moment, let your warmth bloom fully, briefly, and with honesty. That contrast, that shift, it tells them more about you than hours of conversation ever could. And they'll keep showing up. Not because you're constantly there, but because they never know when the light will hit them again. And that unpredictability, when it's grounded in truth, is irresistible. Most people give themselves away too quickly. They mistake proximity for intimacy. They believe that if someone shows up, they automatically deserve access. And that belief is the reason why so many connections feel hollow. Because nothing that's too easy ever feels valuable. That's the psychology behind the next trigger, earned access. If you want someone to chase you, don't shut the door in their face, but don't leave it wide open either. Leave it slightly ajar. Let them work for it. Let them step closer, one deliberate move at a time, not through manipulation, not through withdrawal, but through shared effort, through invitation that requires a response, through rituals that demand participation. Because the moment they earn a piece of you, that piece becomes 10 times more meaningful, and the chase begins not because they're trying to win you, but because they've already invested. This trigger isn't about being unavailable. It's about designing access so that it means something. Think about the people in your life you feel most bonded to. Chances are you went through something together. Maybe it wasn't dramatic. Maybe it was a shared project, an inside joke that had to be earned, a challenge you both overcame. That bond didn't come from proximity. It came from participation. And that's the key to this trigger. You don't create attraction by doing everything for someone. You create it by inviting them into something that asks just enough of them that they have to show up, not as a spectator, but as a co-creator. And once they do, they've marked that moment with effort, which means it now belongs to them too. Seduction becomes deeper when there's initiation, when someone has to step out of passivity and into contribution. That's where you start to differentiate yourself. You're not just someone they talk to or flirt with. You're someone they build something with, even if it's small. Maybe it's a tradition you invent together. You go on a sunrise walk every last Sunday of the month. Or you cook something together once. Or you invite them to join you for a weird little ritual you do alone, like a handwritten letter to your future self or a tech-free Saturday. It doesn't matter how unusual it is. What matters is that it's yours, and access to it isn't free. What happens next is predictable and powerful. They begin to associate effort with closeness. Your presence becomes something they feel proud to be near, not entitled to. And in that pride is attachment, because now they don't want to lose the thing they've contributed to. People value what they've helped create. And when you design experiences that make closeness feel earned, you bypass the shallowness of modern attention and create something that sticks. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you frame your world as something with thresholds. The second you stop being fully available and start being invite-only, you reposition your presence as sacred space. Not cold, not aloof, just structured. You're not rejecting people, you're refining who gets access to what, and within that refinement, you become more desirable, not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because you have standards, not just for others, but for yourself. You treat your time, your rituals, your energy like something worth earning, and they notice. The most addictive people aren't the ones who are easy to get. They're the ones who make the journey to closeness mean something. They don't rely on distance, they rely on depth. You feel close to them, not because they let you in quickly, but because every inch forward came with a shared moment, a task, a challenge, a decision. That kind of closeness can't be faked, it can't be copied, and once someone gets a taste of it, everything else starts to feel shallow. This works because you're creating emotional structure. You're not withholding love or affection. You're giving people an opportunity to step forward. And those who do, they feel seen, they feel trusted, and most importantly, they feel involved. And that involvement triggers investment, not in a financial sense, but in a psychological one. They've now tied a piece of their identity to their closeness with you. They've put effort into something, and effort once given demands meaning in return. So don't let everyone in. Let people earn their place through moments that matter, through doing something together, through overcoming something minor, through being part of your world, not just orbiting around it. When they build something with you, even if it's a shared playlist, a one-time ritual, a private tradition, it becomes a memory tied to action. And those are the ones people can't let go of. Because now, they're not just chasing you. They're chasing what it felt like to be part of something real. There's a silence that isn't passive, it isn't empty, it holds weight. A silence that makes people turn toward you, not because you ask them to, but because you're the only one in the room who doesn't need to be noticed to be felt. That's where quiet authority lives, not in dominance, not in volume, not in intimidation, but in competence, in calm, in the confidence of someone who knows they can steer the ship, even if no one realizes yet that it's sinking. If you want people to chase you, not through excitement, but through trust, this is the trigger that does it. You become the person who brings clarity when everyone else is scattered, stability when the world is spinning, and there's something profoundly seductive about that. Because in a sea of people performing, reacting and reaching, you are the one who is already enough. The psychology here is simple. People are drawn to strength, but not the kind that yells, not the kind that flexes, the kind that solves, the kind that acts, the kind that doesn't just react emotionally, but grounds the space around them. When you have quiet authority, you don't have to prove you're smart, you just make the right call in real time. You don't have to say you're reliable, you just are, consistently, without explanation. You don't compete for status, you're the one people look to when the music stops. That kind of energy doesn't need charm, it speaks through presence alone. Here's what makes it seductive. Most people live with quiet anxiety. They're unsure, they hesitate, they second-guess themselves constantly, and when they meet someone who can lead, not with ego but with ease, it feels like relief. When someone with quiet authority enters a moment of tension, they don't amplify it, they absorb it, they reduce friction, they bring options instead of panic. That's the person people start gravitating toward, not for validation, but for regulation, not for approval, but for alignment. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have the answer to everything, but you have to be someone who doesn't fall apart at the first sign of chaos. In fact, your attractiveness comes from how you handle other people's chaos. If something small goes wrong, a plan changes, a piece of information is missing, someone gets emotional, you stay grounded, you breathe, You assess, you make a move, not with a dramatic pause or a leadership speech, just with clarity, one small action, one calm statement, one adjustment that shifts the energy of the room. It's not about controlling others, it's about owning your presence, and when you do, people begin to trust you without knowing why. That trust becomes desire, because attraction isn't just built on beauty or chemistry or mystery. It's built on feeling safe enough to unfold. When someone feels like they can relax around you because you've shown that you can handle reality, they start associating you with stability, not in a boring way, in a powerful way, because you're not the person who reacts to pressure, you're the person who redirects it. Quiet authority is also built in the small moments. It's in how you carry yourself when no one's watching, how you treat your space, how you respond to other people's emotions. It's in the tone of your "I've got it" when something gets complicated. It's in your posture, your restraint, the timing of your words. You're not always the one with the mic, but when something needs to be done, you're the one who gets it done. And you don't need recognition. You don't need applause. That's what makes it magnetic. That's what makes people start to feel like they're safer around you than anyone else. And once someone feels safe and attracted to you, that's a bond that doesn't dissolve easily. This trigger isn't about being cold. It's not about detachment. It's about earned confidence. You don't have to convince anyone you're capable. You demonstrate it, one steady move at a time. And over time, people stop questioning your place. They start referencing you without realizing it, asking what you think, leaning toward your opinion, mirroring your calm, not because you asked them to, but because your presence gave them permission to settle down. Seduction through quiet authority works because it fulfills a deep emotional need, the need for leadership without ego, for consistency without control, for someone who knows how to navigate not just their own life, but the subtle energies of others. It's rare, and because it's rare, it becomes irresistible, especially to people who live in a constant state of noise. Your calm doesn't feel boring, it feels like freedom. And that's what people chase in the end, not noise, not attention, not even charm. They chase the place where they feel most like themselves. And the person who makes that space possible, that's the one they don't forget.